You've probably seen the headlines, right? The Epstein Files. For years, this story has been this just incredibly tangled web of wealth, power, and of course, absolutely horrific crimes. And now, with thousands of court documents finally released, it feels like the confusion has just exploded. So today, we're going to try and cut through that noise. We're going to unpack what these files really are, what's actually in them, and most importantly, why they matter.
Okay, first things first, we have to tackle the biggest misconception right out of the gate. The internet is absolutely buzzing about a client list. Everyone's talking about the list. But is that actually what these documents are? Well, the short answer, no, not really. The reality is, as you can imagine, a whole lot more complex. And that's exactly what we're here to break down.
So here's how we're going to do it. We've broken it down into 5 parts. First, we'll get a clear definition of what these files even are. Then we'll zoom out and look at the decades-long timeline of this whole case. After that, we'll dive into the unsealed allegations themselves, figure out how these documents even became public in the first place, and finally, we'll connect the dots and see how it all paints a picture of a much larger system.
All right, let's start with the absolute basics. Section 1. What exactly are we all talking about when we say the Epstein Files?
So, the Epstein Files, it's not one single binder with a list in it. Think of it more like a massive, sprawling archive of legal stuff. We're talking millions of pages of court filings, deposition transcripts, where people are questioned under oath, flight logs, emails, all of it. This was all collected over years and years of legal battles, mostly civil lawsuits against Epstein and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell. So the key takeaway here is this. It's not some official, neatly compiled list that Epstein himself kept. It's a messy, complex judicial record.
Okay, so to really get why these documents are so significant, we have to put them in context. I mean, this story didn't just pop up overnight with their release. Nope, it's been unfolding piece by piece for decades.
You really have to go back to the mid-90s, when Epstein was busy building this huge network of influence. It actually took until 2005 for the first official investigation to even get started, which led to a state indictment. But then, 2008, that's when we got that infamous plea deal. You've probably heard about it. It was a deal that let him completely avoid federal prosecution. Instead, he pled guilty to lesser state charges and got just 13 months in jail, with work release. That deal, as you can imagine, became a huge source of public outrage. And honestly, it's a perfect symbol of the kind of system we're going to be talking about.
After that plea deal, the case kind of went quiet for years, but then 2018 happened and everything changed. Some incredible investigative reporting by the Miami Herald just blew the whole thing wide open again. It brought the case roaring back to life and led directly to Epstein's arrest on federal sex trafficking charges in 2019. Now, we all know what happened next. He died in his jail cell about a month later, but the story didn't end there. The pursuit of justice kept going, and it all led to that landmark moment in 2022, the conviction of Ghislaine Maxwell on 5 federal counts, a huge turning point.
Okay, so that brings us to the heart of it. Let's talk about what these court documents actually reveal. What is in the thousands and thousands of pages that are now out there for everyone to see?
Well, a huge chunk of these files, the ones everyone's talking about, they come from one specific lawsuit back in 2015. One of the accusers, Virginia Giuffre, sued Ghislaine Maxwell for defamation. Basically, she said Maxwell called her a liar for claiming she was trafficked by both of them. And that lawsuit, it generated a mountain of evidence, testimony, all this stuff that was sealed away for years. Until now.
Now this is super important. Before we even get into any names, we have to understand something that every legal expert has been shouting from the rooftops. A lot of people are mentioned in these documents for completely innocent reasons. They might have been a potential witness, an employee, or just someone who knew him. So just because someone's name is in there does not mean they're being accused of anything wrong. Being named is not the same as being accused. It's a crucial distinction.
And this right here is a perfect example of why that context is just everything. You see some of the big names that have popped up. On one hand, you have Prince Andrew, who is facing direct, serious allegations from accusers in these very documents. But then you look at others, like former presidents Clinton and Trump. The context is totally different. They're mentioned, yeah, but it's in flight logs or in the context of his social circle. There are no allegations of wrongdoing against them in these particular files. You even see names like Elon Musk and the magician David Copperfield mentioned in totally non-criminal situations. The details really matter here.
And to really understand just how heavy these accusations are, it helps to see the actual language from the court records. This is a direct quote from one of the filings. It's from an anonymous accuser, Jane Doe No. 3, and it details these really explicit and serious allegations against Prince Andrew. It's a stark reminder that behind all the legal jargon and the headlines, there are real people with these just harrowing stories of abuse.
So you might be wondering, how did all this stuff, which was sealed for years, finally get out into the open? Well, this wasn't some kind of leak. It was actually a long, very deliberate legal process. Yeah, getting this transparency was a whole journey, really. It started with that 2015 lawsuit that created this whole archive of documents in the first place. Then, fast forward to late 2023, and a federal judge ordered a bunch of those files to be unsealed. And that wasn't even the end of it. That was followed by actual legislative action, an act of Congress that mandated the Department of Justice to release its records too. And all of that led to the massive document dumps that we're seeing play out right now. And this right here gives you a little peek at what these files actually look like. See? It's not a nice clean spreadsheet, it's dense legal text like this. This is a list of demands for evidence in a lawsuit. They're asking for everything from photos to travel records. It's this incredibly painstaking process that built this entire archive, piece by painstaking piece.
Okay, so what does this all add up to? If it's not a simple client list, then what's the real big picture here? What's the main takeaway from the release of millions and millions of pages of documents?
Let's kind of boil it down to the key takeaways. First, and say it with me, it's a legal archive, not a client list. Second, what it does do is paint this undeniable picture of a vast network of powerful people, all moving within Epstein's orbit. Third, and this might be the most important point of all, it shines a massive spotlight on a system of enablement. It shows how wealth, power, and influence were allegedly used to protect and hide criminal behavior for decades. And finally, let's never forget that none of this would have ever come to light without the incredible, relentless courage of the victims, like Virginia Giuffre, and the journalists who just refused to let this story die.
You know, ultimately, this is probably the most powerful way to look at it. The release of these millions of pages, it forces us to stop focusing on just a list of names and instead start looking at a map of a system. We have to look beyond the individuals and see the connections, the institutions, the whole culture that allowed something like this to go on for so long. It's not just a who's who list. It's a how did this happen map.
And that really leaves us with the big, essential question, doesn't it? Now that we have this map laid out in front of us, what does it truly show us about the intersection of power, wealth, and accountability in our world? And maybe even more importantly, what are we going to do to make sure a map like this is never, ever drawn again?